weekend movie bros, where technically my vocals are so much better up here because it's so open and airy. But I am Jacob, that is
There
idiot.
you go.
Hello, everyone. I want to come here and tell you that this is pulled from a podcast that me and my brother did, and the podcast is whatever the thumbnail is above, and it's going to be linked as well in case you want to go and watch the actual podcast instead of just listening to this particular review. The reviews are normally first in case you want to watch the entire thing. It's up to you, but I just wanted to let you know it's also unedited, so if there's pauses, or anything like that in it, that is because I personally don't edit them, because I don't edit down the podcast. They are exactly how I leave them, and I keep the same thing here, so just want to give you a heads up. All right, let's go ahead and jump into the review.
So our first topic of today has been a movie I have been very much looking forward to talking about since the beginning of June. Now, my brother decided to, not get with the people and see this the week it came out. And so, yeah. However, not to talk about that. He'll talk about his own story with this movie. This is my second favorite film of the summer. We will talk about my first favorite film of the summer in the second part of this June. But this is my second favorite film of the summer so far, and overall, this would probably be about my third favorite film this year that I've seen. Um, Spider-Man Across the Spiderverse is one of the best Spider-Man movies, and it is also one of the best animated films I've ever seen. I will never forget the night I saw this. The ending to this movie is just pure insanity. I can't believe they did it. They accomplished it, and there are some implications for beyond the Spider Verse if they can do it. But the first thing I want to talk about before we talk about the movie at all is after hearing everything about this movie, it does not hinder my enjoyment of this film. However, it just it's sad to know that many people were affected while in the process of making this film. And so when you make sure you understand when you buy this movie on digital or if you continue to go see it in theaters, know that you are doing it not just because you want to go see it, but also in their retrospect and showing them the pride that they deserve for how much they worked on this movie. So again, I love this movie. The Miguel Renaissance is on because of this movie. I don't get why so many people like this guy. He is a jerk in this movie. My favorite character is Spider Punk. He's only in it for a minute amount of time, but man, he leaves a mark. Him and Spider-Man India both are fantastic. But the true heart of this movie is Miles and Gwen. And Gwen gets so much more to do in this movie from the opening to her great story with her dad. I think her and her dad's talk towards the end of the film, as you watch the animation fall down the water, it just breaks your heart. It's so good. And I love what this story continues to talk about, and that anybody can wear the mask. Whether you're supposed to or not, anybody can wear the mask. And they make that very clear in this movie. And I really hope Sony and Sony Animation do not pull their punches going into Beyond and really let this story play out the way it's meant to, and do not take the criticism of what people have been saying about this movie and that, it just makes everything feel obsolete and doesn't matter. That's not the case at all. I was watching Into the Spider-Verse with my little sister, and I looked at my stepdad and went, hey, you see that guy he threw the bagel at? That started all this cataclysm. You can actually see the bagel being thrown at the spot, and I thought that was awesome. Little extra details now you can go watch. And also, I told my brother about this, but since we are talking full spoilers for this movie, and Into the Spider Verse, when Chris Pine's Peter Parker meets Miles, when you look behind him, it's green and purple, not red and blue. So from the get go, he is an heir to the Prowler, and so he changed that when he got bit. And I never realized it. And when I first watched Into Spider-Verse for the first time, I was like, "Why is that spider glitching? That's a nice little tricky feature." But after watching Into the Spider-Verse and Across the Spider-Verse, you now know that spider was in the wrong universe. It wasn't supposed to be there, and it just adds more into the story of Miles from the comic books to this movie. It took people forever to accept the fact that he was playing Spider-Man. No one liked Miles at all at the beginning when he first came out, because he ultimately killed Peter Parker in the Ultimate books. That's what happened when Peter died. He took over the role of Spider-Man, and so seeing him not only get the appreciation between the games, the comic books, and now this movie, Miles feels more like the true Spider-Man that this generation has had over Peter, and it's fine. It's nice to see him get his comeuppance. Same thing with Gwen. I think they took a character who was damsel in distress for the majority of her run in the comic books in the 70s and the 80s, dying off, and bringing her back not once but twice in two different versions of the character between Gwenpool and Spider Gwen. I think Gwen Stacy has had a tremendous reconnaissance since then, and Gwen's shown very, very well in this movie. I also love the Spot. I think the Spot's a terrific villain because it's someone that you can get behind his motivations, but you also understand that, we've all felt that way. Like we always feel like we're inconsequential into someone's story, and this is what would happen if someone took that inconsequentialness too far. And this is showing us what would happen because the Spot never was supposed to be. He was a non-canon event, if you will, because of Miles getting bitten by that spider. And so I find all that, and the way they explain the multiverse in this movie is the best way anyone has explained the multiverse in anything. And I know people talk about the Flash with how they explain their multiverse, and that's cool and everything. But I think what the Flash does so much better than both proper Marvel, and DC is that it's a visual. They show you the visualness of the multiverse. Like they show you, like, here's this event going into this event, going into this event. Whereas with Marvel and DC, they don't really show the visual style of the multiverse and what the variant means. And I think Spiderverse does it so much better. And like people talk about with the first one, they explain multiverses and quantum physics to children, and they all understood what they were talking about. Proper Marvel and DC couldn't do that. So I give them all the credit for that. And that's just because of the writing and the directing from everybody, and the acting in this movie is fantastic. So that's what I have to say about Spider-Man Across the Spider-Verse. This obviously gets a 4.95 out of 10. This is a near perfect movie. For me, I really wish they would have explained more about the part 1 thing, because in the marketing, it's called Across the Spider-Verse. I really wish they would have kept the part 1. I think that would have lowered people's expectations, and not knowing that there was going to be an ending cliffhanger. And so that hurts the film a little bit for me. I wish they would explain themselves in that regard a little bit better. But the movie itself, though, I think is perfect. And so that's my shtick on Spider-Man Across the Spider-Verse. Highly recommend.
Oh, okay. My turn. Okay. Hi. I had a different experience with Spider-Man Across the Spider-Verse. Before I jump into this, I want to very quickly explain my experience, and then we can talk about the movie as a whole. So I saw this 3.5 weeks after it came out. Maybe even a little after that. Maybe, was it 4 weeks? Something along those lines. I saw a pretty long period of time after the movie had came out. For a multitude of reasons, just wasn't in the cards to being able to go to the theater in time. And this movie was huge from the get-go, from the initial press screenings, fan screenings, whatever you might want to say for Spider-Man Across Spider-Verse. It was unanimous. This is one of the best movies ever made, one of the best animated movies ever made, and one of is a work of art. The hype for this thing was ridiculous. I also had heard a few different murmurs. Nothing was truly spoiled for me, but things were pretty much alluded to for the fact that they were going to happen inside the movie, that if I would have saw it opening night or close to opening night, I wouldn't have gotten any type of levels for that. I also was told that the ending is bonkers, wild, crazy. And you know what? It is bonkers, wild, crazy. That's not really the point here. For some reason, I was just expecting something more. I don't know, but because the hype was so high, and I mean, it was so high, I could not help but want to jump on that train and be like, yeah, that's my expectations. They're going to be so far off this roof. It was a bad idea. It was just a bad idea. I went in with too high of expectations for a movie that no movie could really ever get it. To be fair, it's impossible. So with that being said, I really liked Across the Spider-Verse. It took me by surprise. There's a lot of different storylines I wasn't expecting. I did feel the length of the movie, it being one of the longest animated movies. What's wrong?
No, keep going.
Okay. It being one of the longest animated movies to like ever be produced, I definitely felt it. I felt it in spades when watching it, but also I didn't really think that was like a bad thing. I had only seen the teaser trailer. Didn't know like certain characters were gonna pop up in it and things like that. And I don't know, I liked it. Spoiler wise, I did not mind the ending. I just was expecting more. Like I think because I've seen several movies this year with to be continued on their little tapes. I would say this is probably the I thought my phone was ringing. I would say this is the most disappointing one out of them all because even like with Fast X, which is what I mentioned briefly there, it still feels like there's so much more in the tank, but so much happened in that like I didn't personally feel like we were dropping off in the middle of a story. Whereas this one, I had a very strong feeling like this movie only needed 30 extra minutes, and then our story for this particular arc for Miles would be over. So I'm really curious to see how they can expand this 30 minutes. Also, the level that they are on. They're on like a 12 at the end of this movie. If they can continue that on for another 2-hour film, I just don't know if it's possible. So I think that's why it was really disappointing when they had the to be continued. Only because my brain, I'm like, yeah, I felt the runtime, but I could have sat here for 30 more minutes if that's what the story needed to be completed. And it felt like we're just jumping into a third act, and which is fine. There's nothing wrong with it. I just don't know if there's enough movie for just the third act. I do know that the next one is the ending of this entire like story that they have. There isn't any more they're making, at least right now, in this particular moment. But that was like my big like when I saw it, I was like, oh, it just feels like there just needs to be a little bit more writing. Like, what's going on here? You guys couldn't write 20 more pages worth of scripts, like type of thing. I don't know. I think it's beautifully well animated though. It's one of the most. It's a work of art. I do agree. There's certain shots in here that I want hung up on like a poster in my room. Like it's gorgeous. It's beautiful. I think the characters are so well done. Miles. Anytime I have ever seen Miles, he is perfect. Video game, movie, comic book. I've never not liked the character, and more, especially as this progresses and we keep doing this, with these movies and stuff, it just be more evident how much I cannot wait for him to pop up in live action. He's just going to be so amazing. And then we have Gwen, who I absolutely adored in the first one. I was so excited because I was told her character was so much bigger here. I think there's elements of her character that really pissed me off. Just like choices that they decided to make and things. But overall, I had a lot of fun with her, and I felt like her arc was really well like rounded. I feel like her arc is 10 times better here than it was in the first one. So I think that was done with spades. And then with Miguel pulling it in with the villain, ending this off, I also very much like enjoyed him as a character. I think he was a little too one note, so I'm very happy that they brought in the Spot to be like a second overarching villain type of thing.
Yeah.
Like another problem to solve. The Spot was definitely shocking. That's one of the things I talked about with Zachary when I got out of the theater. I was not expecting the Spot to come back and be like this like ultra wide villain that he ends up being. Reminded me a lot of Electro in Amazing Spider-Man 2, of where it's a character like we knew Electro would be a villain. Obviously, that's a little different. But the way they started his character off to where the character ended, it's a very similar arc in that regard, yet one is handled 10 times better than the other. So that's very interesting because we're dealing with the same, universe. Because obviously Tom Holland is called out here, in particular.
Which is
so my favorite Spider-Man in the movie would probably have to be Spider Horse or Spider Baby. One of those two.
Oh, Mayday?
Yeah, I love Mayday. One of those two, I think, or Spider Cat. Like, I think I much more appreciate the Spider-Man that popped up in like little tiny little cameos. Overarching stories, I do have to agree. I think Spider-Punk was the standout. I think it's a standout for everybody in this movie. Daniel Kaluuya came to play, and he was not coming home without some money.
And he worked with what he worked with really,
Mm.
really, really well.
Yeah,
Did
it's
you know that the spider cat was an actual cat?
yeah, yeah, it's pretty
How
cool.
nuts was that?
It's pretty cool. It's very cool.
Our sister's favorite was the spider buggy.
Yeah, I thought that was adorable as well. I also obviously love the fact that Donald Glover was in it.
As the Prowler.
That was such a shocking but also amazing, like little Easter egg type of thing.
Do you know what
Uh,
Donald confirmed?
mm,
He's the Prowler from the MCU.
yeah, that makes sense. It makes sense.
That's which
If
means
you watch,
they're getting things ready for when Miles shows up.
and I do hope that he becomes the Prowler. I do hope that's not like something that he's like wishing into existence or they've talked about, but they haven't signed anything. It would
Yeah,
just be really
I
fitting
think it'd be
for
crazy if they
him
didn't.
because he's been such a big part of the reason why Miles has gotten so much traction. He was a
He's the
big,
reason why his Miles exists.
yeah. It's like I mean, it's a big deal. So I thought that was really cool, and I also like the where it's possible that we could see animated Miles pop up
With live action Toby, Tom, and
yeah,
Andrew.
that's a possibility. Also, I think it's really cool that the third one could introduce us to
To
our
the
live
live action.
action Miles.
Because it could be a variant.
Yeah, I mean, it's very possible. I mean, multiverse is a thing, and we're all connected. It's pretty crazy. I do agree with Zachary. I think this is the most well handled one. The only difference here is I do have somewhat of an issue with with the multiverses and stuff because technically it should be on the same pathways and lines of the MCU. If we're getting technical here, only because they do reference our version of Spider-Man in the
Mm-hmm.
MCU, and so it should be more under what that looks like. But I can understand why they were like, no, we're gonna do our own thing. I just continuity because we're adding so many I mean that's the issue with putting in so many different like layers and stuff is that it can get very
I hope Marvel
confuddled.
I hope Marvel and Kevin can look at the way Spider-Verse did theirs, and maybe in say Avengers Kang Dynasty or somewhere along that lines they can go, well, since that time the multiverse is wrapped around so much that it's now become the universal canon event thing, and maybe they're able to incorporate it into the MCU and make that the way the multiverse
No,
works.
I don't mind. I just think they really need to stick their guns with the way Loki did, because I think Loki's interpretation of the multiverse was
Is
extremely well easy to handle. I just don't understand why
why they changed it.
they just don't talk. I don't understand if you're making a movie based on these characters, you should talk to the people who wrote them originally.
After
Doing a
sitting with
multiverse movie, you should talk to people who
yeah,
came up with the idea to do the multiverse. I mean, that's what you should do. You shouldn't just give it to a new writer and be like, do what you want. I think that's really childish.
I think what Doctor Strange needed, and after seeing, and I was sitting on this for a while because of all the multiverse stuff. What I think Spider-Man and hell, even the Flash have is that they have a conduit there. Like there's someone from within the multiverse within the film. I think
Mhm.
Doctor Strange needed someone with him the entire time, and
Well,
not
that was
just
supposed to be
America
America's.
because she's the one. I think Loki should have been there. I really do. I think Loki should have been the way to move the multiverse forward because his series started it.
I
They should have
definitely
been
feel
there.
like that it should have dealt with a little bit of the TVA. I also feel
Yes, the
like
TVA should have been involved.
that they really should have. I mean, there are so many problems with Mom. There are so many problems, Doctor Strange too, and I'm just hoping that especially with like we'll talk about next month, like Deadpool 3 and the different things that I've heard for that. I think maybe they are going down a different
Yeah,
direction that is going to work really well. So I guess we're just going to have to wait and see.
I have to wait
And
and
also,
see.
I'm excited for that one because Sean Levy has dealt with movies before, having to deal with time travel and or things like that. So I think, and didn't love the movie that
Different
Partake
universe
did,
stuff.
but he's done it before, so it is possible. So, all right, moving on. Oh, my rating. Sorry, jumped off that before I said my ending. My rating is probably like a 4.5. It's almost perfect. Um, I would say it's definitely not my favorite movie of the year. We'll talk about those a little bit later on, but it's definitely my top 5. For sure. I think it'd be criminal if you saw this movie and it wasn't in your top 5. I would declare that. I just think with the fact that the ending was a little more dissatisfying than other to be continues that I've seen. I think
Mm,
for a movie to be really working well, ending on a cliffhanger, you have to complete a plotline storyline in the movie you just saw. To have some self satisfaction, being like, okay, we completed something, but also leave us excited. So end on that like cliffhanger ending, but have a different storyline wrap up. And they were trying to do that with
yeah.
the Gwen and her dad, but I didn't feel that there's enough weight to that as like an
Hmm.
overall story. I felt like it was too small for me to feel satisfied enough by the conclusion.
And see, that's why I'm curious about us watching Mission Impossible this month and coming back and talking about the
Yeah.
next cliffhanger film of the summer and seeing whether or not, because I've heard, you and I have both heard from people that you're still satisfied by the time Mission Impossible ends, moving into the part two. So I'm curious to see whether or not we can, reflect on that between this one
I
and that one.
Yeah, I would have to say that I'm really excited to see it because I'm wondering if it's going to be that our version of Jurassic World Dominion, where Jurassic World Dominion did the best with bringing back legacy characters. Maybe Mission Impossible figured out how to do the best with the to be continued.
Hmm.
And so I'm curious to see maybe there is a formula. Maybe you're like just like I keep saying to everybody out there, if you're making a movie coming back, bringing back characters, look at Jurassic World Dominion. That's a great like structure to go down. Not the movie itself, but the way they handled their legacy characters is an excellent structure. And maybe we'll be able to say the same thing with Mission Impossible: Dead Reckoning Part One, being like this is an excellent way to do a to be continued.
It makes me so upset that Jurassic World is the one being used as a
I know,
legacy character thing when
but it's
Star Wars
true.
should have been the one to set the standard. And instead they were like, no, I'm not getting into this again. Nope, next story.
We
I'm
we
not,
we did talk about that in full. We've
I'm not,
we've done videos and stuff on
we're
that in
past
previous
that. I'm moving
old
on.
podcasts.
Ahsoka's almost here. Let's talk about that one.